Hey everybody, welcome back. The latest episode of AI Unleashed. This time we are going to have a slightly free-flowing discussion about a few things that all relate in the tech space. So things like AI, gaming, learning, the tech revolution, how it impacts all of us, and of course, governance and security will be a thread on that. And the reason it's so wide-ranging is I'm joined today by Dylan Walter from Vespasian, who I've had the pleasure of having a chat with before, and I know he has a lot of these different interests that I also have. So, Dylan, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I come to you guys as a fractional CTO, fractional CISO. I've been in business for myself for the last almost 5 years now, and prior to that, I had a lot of experience in the managed services space. But what really got me into this is gaming. So that's one of my one of the subjects I'm most excited about on this business focused podcast.
I mean, it's important to talk about this stuff for two reasons, I think. And one of those reasons is that, especially in learning and marketing, the more content focused disciplines, they tend to use terms like gamification a lot when they're talking about how they reach their customers, how they reach their employee base. But the other thing is slightly more personal for me, but those of us who are in tech these days, we came from somewhere. We did something, whether it was gaming, whether it was music, but there was something in our past that meant that we had to go and do something in the tech space. And for
Yes.
me, I was playing guitar. I played guitar for 35 years. Back in the day, if you wanted a PC, you got to build it. You want a website, you got to go and build it. When I was playing games, I was playing games first on the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and where you load in the tape and then you press play and you wait 45 minutes with the crackling noise, and then at some point it loads or it doesn't load and you've got to go back. And these computers, they did have this rudimentary capability of coding. So we'd do this with, me and my friends, we'd code something and then you watch the screen go different colors and you make your little icon and it's jumping around. And early platform games were a thing that we could code back then. So I was probably, 8 years old at the time. But everybody in tech, I think, has got a story like this. So what's your story?
My story, I think, it just starts with, honestly, my cousins. We'd go over for holidays to my aunt's place, and they had an NES. And my dad was always adamantly against video games, barely tolerated TV, and very much an outdoors person. So it was like if kids were going to be doing something, it should be outside, and it didn't fly very well. But we really took to it. Just those few hours during the holidays of just sitting down in my aunt's basement playing with my cousins on their NES. It was just something about it that was formative. I think some of it too just comes from being from Minnesota. Our winters are very long and very cold, and while there are outside activities that people do in the winter, they're still not universal. And yeah, just something there clicked, and also just the newness of it, right? I always wanted to work in something that was at least at the bleeding edge of, like, this is going to be the thing of our generation, of maybe even the century. And I think with technology, I did land on that really well. Before I got into tech, I spent a brief period wanting to go into hard science. I was inspired by Homer Simpson and thought I was going to do something in nuclear power, but
Okay.
you know that's kind of my
I did the
beginning.
hard science route. So I my first master's is in chemistry, and I was a research chemist for a while. But it's interesting you say that the social aspect, because I think a lot of folks who aren't in tech think that tech is this like nerdy, you sit in a basement by yourself and you don't talk to people. But with you saying that, you were doing this with your cousins and you were having that kind of social interaction. And for me, I remember when I was probably 8, 10, 12, about that age, in India, my grandfather's house, we used to be on, it was raised from the road because all of the houses were raised from the road because during the monsoon it would flood.
Yeah.
And as kids, you'd wander through basically what looked like a river. You'd go across to the other side. And there used to be a barber shop that had, I think it was an NES, and we were playing Mario on this little tiny black and white TV in this barber shop, like 4 or 5 of the local kids. So that social aspect is very important, and it affects how we learn as well. But let's start the conversation around gaming, because I want to ultimately talk about the AI revolution and how it's impacting businesses. One of the things that drew both of these, business and gaming, together for me, was it last year? Year before, I was playing Final Fantasy 16. And for those of you who don't know the game, RPGs, Final Fantasy is one of the more well-known titles And it used to be the kind of game where you wander through a village on the screen and you get little dialogue boxes pop up. Each of the different characters are able to give you a couple of dialogue boxes of message, and then you go and do whatever it is that ultimately you're solving a problem and you're going on a quest. And the latest iteration of this is open world, right? So it's beautifully rendered, and you wander through a village, and now you've got all of the different dialogues that are going on as you pass the baker, somebody's buying a loaf of bread, and you pass the blacksmith and you hear the banging and he's having a chat with his apprentice and all of this stuff. We have now the capability in the tech space to do things at scale, to do things in a way that captures player behavior and player data in a way that can deliver a semi-personalized or fully personalized experience where the bosses and the monsters that you're fighting have elements of AI that can adapt to your strengths and weaknesses, and you can have rich character dialogues, and a lot of this stuff
And that's the
came
part I'm
together
most
for me.
excited about is that.
Yeah, it's beautiful, right? And a lot of this came together for me when Square Enix, the company that makes Final Fantasy, was very open last year about we're going to use as much AI as possible in the process of game development to maximize the richness of the experience. And I thought that was a really good way to say, we are using it. We're using it for a specific purpose, and these are the types of things we expect to get out of it. How have you matched these two things? Because you work in tech and security and AI as well, and you also game. How have you seen these two industries growing in parallel over the last couple of years?
Well, see, I think much like for you and I, gaming is still the entry point. Because one thing that has changed from when you and I got into gaming is that, and maybe I shouldn't speak for you, but at least in my community, in my youth, gaming was a nerd thing. It was only us nerds did it. But by the time I hit college, everybody did it. Call of Duty happened. Call of Duty and Halo hoovered in, and the sports games too. Call of Duty, Halo, Madden. By the time the early 2000s rolled around, gaming's mainstream now. No one at my nephew's high school would point and laugh at you for wearing a video game shirt. That was not my high school experience. And that's only in a generation. But now that means gaming serves as the entry point for so many more things. I mean, I was just watching a video the other day of they're using an unmanned carrier or an unmanned aircraft as a refueler, that they're flying off aircraft carriers. And the reason that they can do it is because everyone's familiar with a game control now. And so the yellow shirt walking on the flight line is driving the drone from the AI-driven drone from the pad. And they're listening. Could you imagine having to teach someone of the boomer generation to do that? Like, this is now part of your job. The learning curve and how long that stretch is. Gaming is still the entry point, and gamifying anything, whether it's success that the betting markets are having now, it's the slot machine effect for marketers and advertisers. But it's also I'm seeing customers use it to kind of foster friendly competition for content creation and generation. The ink on canvas effect. It's companies are seeing gaming as they're taking what we went through and they're just putting it on steroids. This can now work for everybody. Everybody's got a video game they play. If I can poke the parts of their brain that video game does, I can get some sort of productivity out of them to me.
Interesting. And it's got a little bit of a parallel with the concept of shadow AI. And a lot of companies are seeing that folks are using ChatGPT or Gemini in their own personal lives, and then they come to work and they're trying to get them to use Copilot. And of course, there are barriers, and companies are saying, don't use this other tool that we haven't sanctioned. But the parallel with what you're saying is that folks who are using these tools in their personal lives come to work with a set of skills that you can then go and use, like the controller. If you're familiar with a controller, you can use a controller for work purposes. You're familiar with an AI interface and things like prompting and how to interrogate a model, then you can go and apply that skill across a number of different things. It's quite interesting that I guess it means that there was this submarine, right? Was it a submarine or something submersible that blew up with a bunch of billionaires in it? Deep in the ocean.
And then the Ocean Gate. Yeah, they're driving it with what looks like, and I actually have one on. It looked like this Logitech gamepad that isn't showing up super well through the. But I saw that picture and I just went into my office. I'm like, oh my god, it's mine. It's the wired version of what I have. That's terrifying and awesome at the same time.
But it makes it less absurd, because I think when I first just saw the headline, it's like, why are they doing that? But now that you said it, it's probably a lot of
Ergonomically
things have a
designed.
very similar,
Yeah, like
similar interface.
yeah, the gaming companies would not make money if their controllers weren't easy to use and effective. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. I mean, maybe make it a little physically sturdier and probably a little more sensitive. Like, I watched a breakdown of that, and they're just talking about, like, I mean, it's both awesome, but also they shouldn't have used straight off the shelf. Like, with something that critical, you need a little more higher quality there.
Yeah. No, I think it makes it makes it make a little bit more sense. But back to you know the idea of gaming. I saw a company at some point who was trying to make a simulation out of one of their departments, so for the purposes of training. And I have worked with a couple of companies that are doing simulation based interventions with their workforce to try and get them to be able to use tools effectively or use particular machinery effectively. And a lot of that stuff is also coming together with what's happening in gaming markets. Companies, real companies, are using things like Unreal and the Unreal Engine and Unity to build things that their workforce can use. Do you know much about what's happening in that space with AI for rendering or for automatic, uh, CAD generation or structural diagrams being used to make real machinery,
Not
digital
as
machinery?
much with that stuff where I've heard about it being, and I'm not saying it's not, but what I've been told about a lot is more the training and evaluation phase. So my first job out of
Mm,
college, I worked at a manufacturer for a while, right? And we're talking 2008, and the way that you would train somebody there is, just like any company, they have their busy and slow season, right? And during the slow season, they would train up a bunch of temps for the busy season, and they'd shut down part of the line, and you would learn literally on the job with scrap and old material. Like, you'd have to physically learn to do it. Now, with a combination of AI, the near real life rendering that Unreal provides, and things like that, you can do the training, and AI can make the training more effective by making it more dynamic, right? I mean, we've all you're taking a multiple choice test, and it's a static set of answers, and you've studied the study guide. You can get pretty far by just being a good guesser more than actually knowing the information. If you've
mm,
got an AI watching you do a training in like VR, a lot of what they do now on manufacturing, you don't have to shut anything down. You can train people anytime, throw them in a conference room with a VR headset, and let
mm.
the AI bots evaluate them, compare their results to the experienced tech out on the line. And, oh, yeah, that this person we want, this person send them back to the temp agency, those kind of things. And, and I would imagine that it's probably also being used to just crunch, any big sets of weird and unrelated data. AI is great at finding interesting correlations and connections there. Like, it's also the data economy that's coming, right? If everything in your environment, whatever your business does, everything there is producing extraneous data on how it's used, what it does, everything, chew on the data, get interesting answers that could be the next, gallon of rocket fuel you dump in your business, right?
Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit because I think that's very interesting from a number of different perspectives. Now, the first one is I've worked on kind of digital twin and simulation programs quite a lot, and doing this kind of thing, but there were always closed system entities that we were making. Now, when you introduce the idea of observation or surveillance or whatever we're going to call it, so you have an observer mechanism. Now, this could be you have somebody in a VR construct and they're taking actions, and you have something inside that construct that's doing the observation. Or it could be that you have something that's VR and has an element of haptics to it, and you have some kind of camera based observation in the room to see how they're moving. Either of those things, principles are basically the same. But you introduce two things. So one is the data capture, and the other is the security around the data capture. So now you have, and with data capture, you always have a data model. Now, with the scientific, academic, research way of doing data models is you capture the data that you need to prove the point that you're making. With the social media modern way, modern big tech way of looking at data, you capture everything and then figure it out later. These both have different ethical implications, and both of these approaches have different security implications. What do you think about how we manage that? Have I missed the category?
Well, the first thing is to choose to manage it. What scares me right now, a lot of what I see is people seeing all the upside and none of the risk. They're like, oh yeah, I can bring in this AI consultant. I know I have all this data. I know it's got great insights, and we're just going to take the bucket of data, dump the data into the AI, and then money flows out. And that's all that they see. And, you and I realize that all of this data, the same data that can be weaponized to take this business to the stratosphere, is also the data that can be weaponized to put this business in an early grave. And so it's, you talked about ethics. A lot of data that businesses have is sensitive, whether it's financial data, whether it's, even employee PII. I always have to tell even the smallest businesses, do you have an employee? Well, you've got important data to protect because you've got enough data on that employee to do mortgage fraud. So, let's make sure we're protecting it. And AI, it comes back to that core principle of a computer cannot be held accountable. So you have to build these accountability structures. What happens if the wrong person prompts the AI in the wrong way, or the wrong set of triggers happen and the AI does something unexpected? Who's accountable for that? And how is it made right? Because how can this fail? You got to kind of take the NASA approach of building failure modes. There are 15 ways in which this little tiny subcomponent can fail, and we need a plan for at least 14 of them, because that one failure mode probably has no consequences, but most of the other ones do, right? And so it's committing to the process that, the process for securing stuff doesn't change that much. It starts with a culture of we're securing it because it's our ethics, it's our data, it's our customers, it's our people, it's our risk. It's about owning that and keeping that part of the culture, even though, AI is going gangbusters, even though, you can't bury your head in the sand, but you have to stay somewhere in that middle ground between I'm fully on the AI train and I'm not looking back and I don't care about any of the risk, and I'm burying my head in the sand and pretending this isn't happening until all of my customers, or all of my customers, all of my competition, and all of my vendors are light years ahead of me. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I said this earlier today on a different session, which was that a year in this game, doing this, what we do in the AI space and the agentic space, doing this full time for a year, versus somebody who's saying that AI, it's not going to last, it's not a thing, I'm not going to get involved in it. It's night and day. The difference is huge. It's not just a year's worth of work. It's accelerators, it's growth, it's a whole load of different things. With the security side of it, so one of the big things for me this year is, last year I did a lot of work in the AI readiness space, and that was the appropriate leadership, strategy, governance, tech, data, culture, skills, all of this stuff that a company should be looking at if they're looking to deploy AI. But the focus was really AI software as a service. So that's where you buy something and it basically lives in your browser and in your systems, and you go do that. The difference this year is I've got another model, which initially I started to just update that one. And I thought, after a while, no, these things are so radically different that I need a separate model. And that was for agentic readiness. Now, the difference for me, and the pivot point for me, was when you have an AI software as a service with a human in the loop, you have breakpoints where effectively you're not going to get runaway. When you have autonomous agents that are able to mobilize resources and take and execute actions in a digital environment, you need to be thinking differently around accountability, where the human is on the loop and how that works, the kill switch for when these things inevitably go haywire.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, these two things, these things were enough to necessitate a different framework. How are you seeing it? Because this is what you've just elaborated on. How are you seeing that play out in the security space? The difference between AI SaaS and agentic.
So what's in development right now? The big buzzword that I've been hearing a lot is MCP, Model Context Protocol. It's the beginnings of a standard, and very much the beginnings. That word is carrying a lot of weight, and it should. The beginnings of how Agent A and AI SaaS product B and Agent C all interact and connect, and how you, the business leader, the architect, the security person, can try to have some level of grip on the security, right? Now, the challenge with where it's at is that, one, it's an open standard that's not all that standard yet. And as with most open standards, they're not that open and not that standard, but they're here, right? big challenges they see is model context protocol may support a lot of the big things that you just called out, kill switches, any kind of limiters. Like a scary thing I saw the other day is some vibe coder like wrecked his financial life because his AI could unrestrictedly mess with his AWS bill. And anybody who's played around in SaaS platforms has probably made an expensive mistake on them, but AI can make those expensive mistakes even more expensive. So different agents won't support the entirety of model context protocol, or won't support like one of the things that Copilot has. They have a field where you can make Ash is responsible for Ash's agent. You made the agent, and whatever your agent does, there's a log entry that says agent that is Ash's did this. So bigger boss can look and say, oh, colossal disaster is or colossal success is but belongs to you. And yeah, that's great. But again, if they don't support the limiters, or they don't support the control that addresses your risk, you're still in a bad spot. So it's still a controls and risk conversation, and it's something that has to happen more rapidly too, because a lot of pre-AI security and governance didn't happen at as rapid of a cadence as it probably needs to if you're going to dive into AI. If you want to do this sensibly, if you want to automate more, if you want to limit some of those breakpoints for speed, you need to have recurring and iterative governance conversations more frequently and faster and with greater enthusiasm. It's making sure that everybody understands this risk. Like, we're getting really comfortable with our AI agents. They're doing really well in all these spaces, so we're going to give them more. But now what we're giving them more is higher risk stuff. This AI agent can spend money on my behalf. I need to be really on top of it, because it's either going to go super well, or, how much debt can you go into because your AI made a mistake, right?
That's interesting. So one of the things I've released this week, I think it's this week, is the concept of agentic HR. And that's nothing to do with HR, the human discipline, but it's the idea that if you are bringing an agent into your synthetic workforce, then you need to be thinking about it as if it's the life cycle of an employee. What's the role that we want the agent to do? How do we provision that and write the guidelines and the specification? How do we onboard that with sufficient resources, APIs, MCP, etc., all the way through the life cycle towards decommissioning and taking the keys off them when their role is no longer required? So I've written that out, and that's this week. It's gone out on LinkedIn and on my website. But the other side to this, as you've just the connections, the connectivity, the performance management. It's not just about onboard and offboard. While there is the life cycle of the agent, we need to be thinking about how we monitor and manage performance. And the thing that you just said that triggered that in my mind was, if we have an agent that's performing well, to me, in that HR model that I've just outlined, we would not change what it's doing. We wouldn't give it more, we wouldn't give it less, we wouldn't give it a different level of permissions. That would be a conversation that would happen at the provisioning end, at the recruitment side. So you would say, well, if we need an agent that has a higher level of risk information, that's potentially a different agent, or we need to reconfigure the guidelines, and we need to do all of this stuff. So that's how I'm thinking about that. What do you think?
I love it. That actually made a lot of things in my head click. One of the biggest things that you talk about having AI HR, orphaned agents are going to become a huge problem if you don't have that, right? Let's assume the best. You get hired at a firm, you work there for years, you have a great time, and you just get to the point where you're like, yeah, this just isn't my future anymore. I love the company loves me. I'm going to go do other things. And one of the many things that a lot of employees are at many, many levels up and down most organizations are going to be able to do in the next decade is make their own agents. And a lot of the key skills are going to be, what can you do with AI to do this job really, really well? Because you're going to be expected to, work your 9 to 5, but within your 9 to 5, your productivity might be dictated by, thanks to AI, you're doing the work of, maybe you used to have a team of 100 people. Now you have a team of 10. And that's because all of these people have 10x their effectiveness with AI agents, but they might be moving so fast. Like, your boss might not immediately know that Ash is moving on. We've updated the job description. We're going to put up a posting. We've got an idea of the kind of person we want to fill that gap. But part of what they'll have to transition is that AI knowledge in some space, like much in the same way that when a regular employee leaves, most organizations still struggle with legacy HR in that aspect. Someone's been with my organization a long time, done a lot of good work. They've left. And now I've got 5 years of email to go through, 5 years of cloud storage. And I might also be realizing as a manager that Ash did such a good job. I don't have such a great detail on how he worked because he just did it so well. Now I got to get this other person in here. And that nebulous space is now going to have a bunch of AI agents in it. And yeah, if the organization isn't ready to deal with those, the potential for chaos is very high.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, the reason that I came up with this was I was having a conversation in October time, maybe, with somebody who works at a big company, and they were saying, you know what, we let all of our employees make their own co-pilots, and we've got like 5,000 of them. And I was like, 5,000? There's going to be a lot of overlap, duplication, a lot of redundancy. Often, co-pilots, folks are people mobilized once because they were having a go. There's going to be a lack of version control. There's a lack of ownership. All of these things seem as likely to me as if you have lots of people working in a folder structure and it becomes a dumping ground for basically garbage. So that was the trigger for me to come up with something that I think works for agents. But if you're watching this, go read the paper, see if it works for you. There is that. Do you have an opinion on any of the stuff that we've spoken about so far? I was thinking towards the tail end of last year that there are basically 4 stacks now. So you've got the kind of NVIDIA, Microsoft, OpenAI vertical, Microsoft being hyperscaler. You have the Google vertical, because now they've got all of their own stuff within that one ecosystem. You have the, just going to call it the China vertical, with whatever they're doing. And then you have the little bit more open source stuff, the kind of Replit, Lovable, Cursor, N8N kind of stack that people can go and play with. In each of these areas, we have different nuance around how we might make agents, manage agents, VS Code, anti-gravity, whatever IDE you're using as well. Are any of them stronger or weaker than the others in any of the aspects that you use?
I would say that long term, unless something big changes, Microsoft and Google are still going to win. And I say that because they already have the business productivity game. If we rewind, if we rewind to 2019, the game is still Microsoft and Google. Right? ChatGPT is barely a footnote at that point. The AI revolution has not truly kicked off. And these guys are sitting on piles of money because those are the two those are one of the two options that 99.9% of the businesses choose. We're going to make our documents and make our data that our businesses run on in one or both of these platforms. And now we're getting into this AI age where AI is going to enhance productivity. Like Copilot Studio is brilliant. Right now in the long game, I think Microsoft is currently winning, but Google's very rapidly catching up because they're setting it up so their AI product can hit the ground very hard. If you're an organization, it's a Microsoft shop, and you're going to go full AI, like with a couple of clicks, everybody in your organization can start building agents if you're willing to cut the check. And that is just the ease of adoption and the already bolted on stuff that probably won't go away. Like I'm not an Outlook fan. I've been wanting Outlook to die for 15 years, and they just released a new one and it's not going anywhere. The direct and deep integration into the productivity tools the businesses are already using and the giant war chests they already had are going to put them ahead. They're at a significant advantage that the other players aren't. I just saw, and I'm not much of a finance guy, so I wouldn't take my financial opinion, but I've seen several headlines on OpenAI potentially hitting some deep financial struggles. And if I had to bet, I think Microsoft's just going to eat OpenAI completely. And, those two pillars are going to be there. Gemini is currently better rated than all of them. That's what I use a lot of. But, it's a lot bigger spend with Google to get the Copilot Studio equivalent, but the baseline productivity enhancements are still very much there. Like I use Gemini on almost a daily basis to, help with laundry lists of things, and it has made me a lot more productive. The meeting note taker, even like I'm someone that I have two options. I can either take notes or I can give you the attention you're due in the meeting. And I almost always choose the person over that. And the AI agent gets me the notes. And, that has been a huge productivity enhancer. Any competitors are going to have to beat that integration. You got to find a way to make it as easy as they're making it, despite needing access to their platforms. And that's the hard bridge to cross.
I think there are pros and cons to this. I agree. But there are pros and cons. So last year, I had a subscription to every big model. I had
Yeah.
OpenAI, well, ChatGPT, and the Playground APIs. The same with Anthropic, the same with Google. Because a lot of people were asking me for my opinions on the different things. What do I think of this model, that model, the other model? Now I'm 100% Google. So I've got the Google Workspace. I use Firebase. I use Vertex. I use Gemini. Gemini 3 Pro is just phenomenal. I use anti-gravity as well. And between those things, I've basically canceled all of my other subscriptions. I don't even use GPT. I haven't opened GPT for 2 months, maybe. The same with Claude, right? So for me, I think Google's winning this, and not only winning it, but also that now there's so little difference between all of them that not little difference between that there is a difference. And obviously I wouldn't prefer Gemini if there wasn't a difference, but the difference between the next model iteration and how much it's going to change my productivity, I think is now negligible.
Yeah.
Finding that?
They're the same differences between the other Google and Microsoft products now. It's becoming a preference. It's becoming a what do you know best. It's one of my favorite conversations to have with smaller business is the Google versus Microsoft conversation on just legacy traditional email, right? And it's just going to be comfort level, like there's a possibility. I think the biggest thing ChatGPT will be remembered for is being the king for years of shadow AI, right? Because ChatGPT was the brand name that everyone remembered. They were the first ones. They were the mainstream. They're the ones you're using. You talked about the flow of what I use at home flows into what I use at work. What you didn't say, but what I feel you probably implied is that it does flow the other way. So much when I'm coaching on general security, I'm telling business owners to be like, hey, if you're teaching your employees good security practices, you're not just helping you, you're helping them, because they're going to take that how to spot a phishing email, how to properly build a password, that MFA is a good thing and you should have it on everything. They'll take that home. And that's also going to, that I think part of what has been driving Gemini's success is if I work in a Google shop and I've had Gemini at work, and I work at an organization that has embraced AI governance. So much of what I was saying is ChatGPT was taking off, and Microsoft and Google were catching up. I'm telling organizations that, especially if you get a lot of Gen Z employees, you got to embrace this, because if you don't give them an alternative, you may not be able to adopt ChatGPT. That barrier to entry might be too high for you. But what you need to make sure is that they have something similar that they can use, so they're not using ChatGPT on their phone to do their work on your systems. And I think that has caused the loop back. We're like, okay, I got to know Gemini at work. And then as Gemini at work started becoming more popular, Google also lowered the barrier to their free product. They kind of came more last with the as consumer accessible as ChatGPT functions in Gemini. Like it was only 3 months ago that my Google Home systems forced me to light up Gemini for them. And I think that's going to be looked back on as a very smart strategy. ChatGPT started at home and they tried to carry it to work, and Copilot tried to start with both of them at the same time. You can get Copilot with your Office Home subscription and your Office Work subscription. And Google said, we're going to start at work now and we're going to bring it home. Gmail was the consumer offering they took to work. Now their AI offering is the work offering they took home. And I think that's very serendipitous.
You make me think of something, and that is, you've just experienced it. I'm sure I will experience it in the next few minutes with this that's sitting on my desk. These things are listening to what we're saying. And to some degree, deliberately, when I open Gemini and I activate voice, it's listening for my audio and then it's answering me in whatever I ask for. GPT does the same thing on the mobile application. When you say about employees using some of these tools on their phones, we also have the potential in the future for typing to be a thing of the past as we move more towards voice conversations. As we move towards voice conversations, the security imperative is slightly different because we all have the personal devices, most likely that have listening capabilities, while we are talking to our work machines that also have listening capabilities. How are you seeing any of that play out in the work that you do?
I'm not encountering it as like, I'm sure at more high security places, I think they're probably still, you know, I think it's going to be very interesting the way that more high security places try to leverage it, right? So when I worked for a healthcare company everyone's heard of in their security division, they were disabling webcams, disabling mics. The higher security folks than me, they literally had this tool that would physically break the webcam on a laptop before they'd issue it to you because you could, they're like, no one's exfiltrating data, no one's pulling an Edward Snowden here, and we're not doing that. I think there's going to be a day where, like, you go into a skiff and there's going to be a device there provided for you that's supposed to talk and listen, and they're going to soundproof it, and like they're going to have to do creative things to prevent what just happened with my a smart speaker. Is if you're going to benefit from this gain from this gain here, we have to find a way to have our cake and eat it too. We need to manipulate the listening. I mean, these devices all have the, like, I didn't consider that in prep for this. I probably should have went and shut the mute switch or turned the mute switch on that thing where it physically shuts the mic off. Lesson learned there for me. But as far as the security implications, it's just going to be navigating that. Every organization is going to have to decide if the productivity increase is worth the risk. And also it's a quality conversation too. I've been personally hesitant I have enough worry when I write something myself that I'm going to make an embarrassing punctuation mistake or misspell a word or whatever. It's going to take me a while personally to get comfortable with doing Star Trek style voice dictations, computer record personal log, computer compose an email to Ash and thank him for having me on the podcast. Like, I'm going to be so nervous that, so much of the way I project my competence and intelligence into the world is, through written communication and trusting the computer to write for me in a way that I'm not spending just as much time rechecking it to make sure it captured what I said. Like that's my personal struggle with it, but I think other people are much more comfortable with it. I mean, I've met a few chiefs that are full on into, I can't remember the last time I typed an email. I just dictate everything, and not to my human secretary, but to some AI tool. I mean, they make one now that's getting popular with my YouTube playlist. It's press a button and throw it on the table, and you and I can just talk, and it will pull out your voice, pull out my voice. And if we've met before, it'll just put in, oh, Ashwin was talking. And then if my brother who introduced us stepped into the room, be like, oh, and then Andrew joined the conversation and and did those things. And man, that is cool. And I think it's just there's both the risk, and it's a weird combination of risk and comfort, I think, that we're going to have to navigate with it.
Yeah, I think from a company perspective, it's going to be tricky to manage, but I also think that most people are just not thinking about this at the moment. From the how do I use voice perspective, for me, if I'm away from my desk, so I'm at the gym, I'm cooking in my kitchen, even if I'm driving somewhere, right? Of course, observing safety and not using my phone while I'm driving, etc. But I have Bluetooth and I have Google Auto and all of this stuff. So I can be having a conversation. I'm thinking about this particular thing. Pick holes in it for me. Or can we think about an outline for this? What am I missing here? If I was to go down this direction, what are the pros and cons? So this kind of brainstorming back and forth, I use nearly every time I'm away from my desk, I will be having a voice conversation. And in doing that, the way I tend to find that helps my productivity is that when I get to the end of a conversation, I'll crystallize it in some kind of action. And that action usually is, right, we've done this. can you write up a summary that I can use for whatever it is? I want to record a video. Make me some bullet points. I want to write an article. Make me a summary or an outline that I can work with, etc., etc. So it's very much that conversation into a starting point for some kind of work.
So it's more of an augmentation to your own internal monologue, right? The same conversation you'd have with yourself in your head on your commute, you're now having more expansively with your AI agent, and it's not necessarily producing a work product that you're going to directly just give to somebody. It's queuing up your tasks and your plan and everything for later execution where the spit and the polish will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll work the same way with workflows. So I have a number of workflows in my business, and most of them are voice activated. So I will do that as well, and it will log whatever I'm saying in my databases, etc., etc. As long as you have the system set up, I think it's good. But this is what's led me down track to think, well, in the future, maybe I don't need to type much anymore. I still do type, and I type way more than I probably thought I would. But there's a potential future where that goes away if it's possible to capture what I'm saying effectively. I don't know, have you ever tried that? I mean, for example, the thing that we're doing now, there will be a transcript. That transcript is in this particular platform, it's pretty good. It captures every word that we say, every it captures it authentically, and then we can edit. Some of them I've used Notion transcript once or twice. It's terrible. It captures virtually nothing. It gets most things wrong. Have you had success with the note takers?
I found it varies widely, both by note taker. Yeah, like you said, one of our challenges we're having with Gemini is it's very hard to automate what it does with the notes afterwards. Like we use Gemini note taker to even evaluate our the quality of our sales calls. And like as a group, we're going over, we're looking at transcript, we're looking at notes. Hey, did we ask the customer the right question? Did we, were we coming to this meeting with the right expectations, right energy? Everything that's up for evaluation now, it's capturing well enough for that. But just the file workflows of like, man, I wish you could just tell it that, hey, for this type of meeting, stick these meeting notes in this shared folder because we're all going to review it later, or prompt me for what to do with this, or there's more configuration around that kind of data handling. And so we tried to use Monday's AI note taker. Like, okay, maybe we do have to embrace this third-party stuff, because the other challenge with the ecosystem right now, and something I think really has to give here, is how poor I shouldn't even say poor, because it doesn't really exist. There's no good integration between someone else's AI and a competing platform, right? If I add a Monday note taker to any Teams, Meet, Zoom, whatever, it shows up as a person and it screws up the whole experience, in my opinion. The best part about the first party note takers is they're invisible. They're just there and they do the job. But it's hard to benefit from the output there. The third party ones, you can benefit from the output more, but the quality varies. And we couldn't justify the cost because the Monday note taker was just so like, yeah, it could automate all of the after meeting steps with it, but the quality of the notes it was taking was trash. So, it's that's a, and also it's going to come down to cost, because we're already seeing now the economic impact is going to be interesting, because we're seeing everybody with AI tools built in is raising their prices to start paying for that AI, but they're not lowering their walled garden to enhance that very well. And I worry kind of, that's some of the obstruction there too, I think, is, all right, if I'm using first-party AI tools to capture data. I'm using third-party AI tools to move and process, and I'm definitely going to take a lot of what you said on building processes around that. You've reframed my thought process there, but even to do that, all right. So where I've seen Notion used super well is that workflowy stuff, and it's like at some point, I wonder if the economic incentives will not be as awesome as they are today. Right? This money burning competition comes to a close and they got to start making that back. How trapped are we going to be? Are we going to be able to, is there a future coming where we accomplish brilliant efficiencies in our businesses with these AI tools? They made it so we could do more business faster and with less resources. But then the cost of those tools shoots so far up that now we can't afford to use them. We have to go back to the old way. And will that take long enough where there won't be enough people to know how to do it the old way? Like I think back to a horror story I read about a hospital breach, and they were pulling nurses out of retirement because everything was down and barely any of their staff knew how to chart on paper. Like the
Okay.
hospital stopped functioning. And I worry that we could be headed that way with some of this AI stuff. Is we become dependent on it. We don't have the economic control over it, and then that happens. And yeah, I might have gone a little off track there, but that's kind of
No,
where my head went.
it's important, I think, for a couple of different reasons. So one is the conversation around organizational redesign. So if we say that we have agents or we have AI, and that is going to some degree, depends on the company as to what the degree is, but to some degree, it's going to displace roles. We have a little bit there, something that is built in financially to say that even if the price goes up within certain parameters, we have an upper threshold and a lower threshold, but within certain parameters, it's still going to be more efficient to do things in a way that's automated or has machine capability than if we were to do things the old fashioned way. So that's one stream of looking at this. The other way to look at this, and I think both of these are true and need to be thought of in parallel. The other way to look at this is the legacy format, the legacy skill, the legacy method kind of issue which you've described. And it reminds me of a story. So I don't. Do you read like sci-fi or fantasy or anything like that?
Some, yeah. I watch more than I read, but yes,
Yeah.
I'm definitely a sci-fi nerd. Currently, midway through a rewatch of Star Trek DS9. So,
Okay, that's a blast from the past. I've not seen that for a while.
yeah.
The story I'm thinking of is in one of the books on my shelf, written by a guy called Terry Brooks. He tends to do this like a three books make a story, so that kind of thing. And there is a story somewhere in one of these books. He's written about 30 books, so don't think I could put my finger on it exactly which one it is. But there's a story where it's this kind of Lord of the Rings medieval kind of people on horseback kind of situation. And there's a guy who goes on a quest, and he goes on a quest for the information, the knowledge of the ancients. There's going to have the secret that's going to unlock the key to the castle or whatever it is. And he goes off on this quest, and he's on horseback, and he goes across the mountains and through the woods and reaches a cliff and then captures an albatross and goes across to the next island and fights dragons and all the usual things you would expect in a fantasy genre. And then he gets eventually, risking his life and all of his team members and losing lots of folks on the way. And he gets to this library, the knowledge of the ancients. And he opens this treasure chest, and there's a box, and it's full of compact discs. It's full of CDs, right? Digital format information. And that's the only point in like the 30 books, I think, that I read that you go, you know what? This isn't in the past. It's not in the present in a parallel thing. This is in the future. This is the Planet of the Apes, Statue of Liberty. This was our planet moment where you go, this was the knowledge of the ancients, and it's in a format that he doesn't recognize. He has no capability of accessing. And it's this legacy thing that he just doesn't even know what to do with it.
You could spend an entire lifetime just trying to read it, consume it in some way.
And so these are the kinds of things that you're talking about, that we need to somehow, while we are thinking about future-proofing, we should also be thinking about either updating our skills, updating our capability to be resilient, updating our data formats, or making sure we still have the machine that can read the old thing. Well, how is that manifesting in the work that you do with companies? I'm thinking of the Fortran example.
It's teetering on the edge of manifesting is kind of where it's at. Of my customers, I serve mostly the small and medium business market. And none of my customers have fired somebody because they've replaced them with AI. And none of my customers have shut down a job posting yet because AI can do it. They're still in the force multiplier stage. Everybody is, I think we all know that that's coming, but my customers are seeing that far afield so far. They're still getting their heads around. I'm expecting a big hit further down the road. Like I think Big Corp is going to have that hit first. They're gonna crack the nut, and I mean, I think we're already starting to see this, CEOs declaring no hires until you prove AI can't do it. These predictions of these big mass layoffs, that wave won't hit the small and medium market as hard or as fast, but when it does, we'll know it's there, I think. And hopefully that will insulate some of them from that problem. Hopefully Big Corp also has to solve this before Small Corp does. I'm hopeful, but the world is changing so fast these days. Sometimes that's a prediction. The bigger, heavier predictions of, I guess I'm a little more hesitant to predict safety and comfort than I am doom. And maybe that's just because I've been in security for too long too, but
I'm with you. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
yeah.
So, but on that point, I think that, yeah, I agree with you that these effects are going to be harder and quicker in enterprise than they are in small to medium business. And I think part of the reason for that is just the scale of enterprise. If you've got 100,000 people that work for your business, getting rid of 20,000 people is, it's not a trivial thing, but it's way easier than if you've got 3 people in a startup. The likelihood of them having folks that are either not adding value, or processes that are not adding value, or roles that don't necessarily need to be in place, or there are duplications, or all of these things. I think the likelihood is way, way higher in a big business. But I think the big businesses also are responsible for a lot of we were doing something with AI and we didn't really see any value, and we were unsure of the security implications, and we needed to take these huge measures of risk mitigation that didn't really do anything, because they had the deeper pockets, so they went harder more quickly on certain things which were maybe infrastructural that small businesses didn't bother with. Do you think? Have you seen? Well, I guess if you're working mainly with small to medium, you probably you may or may not have seen some of that stuff.
Well, where we do see some impacts of that, an interesting conversation with an ops consultant that I work with, a friend of mine, and he kind of does both enterprise and SMB because he's just kind of the efficiency guy, and he's been doing this before AI came, but now he's adapting that to AI. And he said what he finds really interesting is that when the big corps do layoffs, we get a lot more small businesses, right? And then the more small businesses we get, because I have met, well, and even with the U.S. government drastically downsizing, I've bumped into 6 people this year that had been U.S. government employees for years, laid off, and then just decided because they had that soft landing that they could take the gamble and start a business. Some of them somewhat related to what they did in the past, and a couple of them just like, well, this is my, they say the average person changes careers 3 times in their life, and they're just going, this is my new career now. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And then we also see, like you talked about, or Big Corp being able to absorb those failures. Some of the ways that they do that, at least here in the US, we've seen some more regulations come out that haven't been that great for small businesses. And that's been coinciding with an attempt at some buyback of these skilled employees, right? So first there was this land grab, and especially by Facebook was the most notorious for it. Bought a lot of talent to make sure their competitors couldn't buy that talent. They had a lot of really capable people largely twiddling their thumbs at Meta for a long time just to make sure that Sam Altman or Elon or Sergey Brin couldn't get a hold of them. And then as priorities shift, they're like, okay, well, now they're almost treating it like an investment class. They're like, well, I'm going to liquefy this investment for now. My risks have changed. These talented people go out and start businesses. And then as it shifts again, they go, oh no, I need these people back, but they won't come back because they went and started a business. So now I'm going to lobby for some regs to make it harder to be in small business. So hopefully they close their businesses and come back to work for me.
That's body chess right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
I kind of respect it, but at the same time, it's not fair to small businesses.
Right.
Wow, that's the way to do it. If
Yeah.
you are in that kind of game.
Right.
So I'd like to move on to something slightly different, and that is that where we are right now, we've kind of chewed around on the 2025, January 2026 kind of state of play. If we take a little bit more of a crystal ball kind of gazing piece, so we're going to look throughout 26. Let's not go crazy and say, by 2030, we're going to have robots in our kitchens doing our laundry and all of this stuff. But if we just think about this year, even just the next 6 months, what do you think things are going to look like in the AI agent security space, middle of the year, tail end of the year to this year?
I think it's really hard to say. As far as agents and security, the big directional indicator is going to be how fast the adoption continues to be. I'm feeling a lull right now as far as like those of us that went through the Web 2 boom with our eyes open, took the lessons we learned there and the benefits we gained from having our eyes open and embracing Web 3, and we're doing that. And I don't think there's very many of us left that weren't. So now, if AI is going to continue to grow, it has to get those less enthusiastic people involved. And I can't tell if I think that's really going to happen, but I think if we're going to continue to see this growth, it needs to happen. Like that's I feel a lot of uncertainty right now. I'm not at all very comfortable making a 2026 prediction. The world is in a very fluctuating state right now. And when I look out there, I don't see much in the way of concrete certainty to make a prediction on. But I know that what is required for this to continue as it has been or go faster is my mom has to choose to use AI and make it a part of her daily life as a retiree who's choosing to paint for most of her time. I need to be asked by my least tech savvy contacts in the business and personal world questions about AI that they've come up with by choosing to use it on their own or by saying, this is now part of my job. And if that happens, this will continue. If that doesn't happen, I think this will plateau. I think we'll be on a plateau for this year.
Interesting point about the non-tech folks in your life. Because I think I would have said I'm reasonably comfortable with how 2026 is going to play out from the business perspective. And the reason for that is what I've observed in the last year, I think will continue in the next year. And that is, there is a new thing. Doesn't matter what it is, it's agents for 2026. There's a new thing. Everybody runs off to do it. Everybody runs off to market it. So suddenly everything is agentic coffee cup, right? So that's going to be a thing that you see in the market. And lots of folks and companies who just don't know any better are going to buy shiny things because vendors convince them that it's the best thing out there. You're going to have some folks who are going to be doing actually technically agentic work. And that's going to look interesting and very capable initially. And then you're going to get maturity. So while you might have an agent or a set of agents that can do some things, initially you'll test and initially you'll get some execution. But then the maturity side of it will be governance, security, robustness of output, making sure you have quality control, linking it, interoperability, linking with other things, MCP and integrations. All of that stuff will happen as people get more mature in this space. So I think these two things, the marketing piece and the maturity piece, I think are reasonably foreseeable as a trajectory for 2026.
Yeah, I can see that. I can get on board with that too, because that's a very even if we do plateau, as long as the cash burning hasn't been too impactful on the big players, they can pivot and focus on maturity. And if they do, that's a great way to make sure to get on the rise if we get off a plateau. And it's still smart to do, whether or not. I guess I often see that those smarter decisions get made less when there's rocketry growth, right? I mean, like the fact that MCP came after agents. Like I got a deep dive on MCP from Microsoft at the Microsoft campus. And it was amazing the gymnastics they were doing to try to pretend that it wasn't very clearly an afterthought, right? And yeah, if we keep rocket level growth, I hope they make those smart choices. If we do plateau, I think that is, as long as no one's in panic mode, I think they can dump into maturity, and I think that would be very good for the ecosystem.
Well, I agree that I think the rocket mode is going to continue with the big companies, but the big tech companies, just to be clear, but big companies like enterprise, like engineering companies, law firms, whatever it is, different verticals, their adoption tends to be slightly slower. So what my observation is in those sectors, you're going to see this try, mature, govern kind of model. The individual side of things I didn't think about until you just mentioned it. But I mean, my mum uses Copilot, I think, maybe Gemini, and she's 76. So she's having a good time with AI, but she's kind of quite into the tech side of things. But I'll have to observe a little bit more what I see in the non-tech population of people that I know, which might be very few people.
And I guess I just look at that from that's like untapped demand, right? Like the rocket level growth requires demand from somewhere. Where's that demand going to come from? And in my mind, the best place to get easy demand is just the unadopted, you know, who needs to cross the threshold. I mean, I look at even texting and social media. All of my parents resisted texting for a long time. And then my sister taught my stepmom the text, and my brother taught my mom the text. And then now they're almost like us, where text first, then call. 2 years ago, they all figured out how to use group chats. They've been adopting faster, nowhere near as fast as us. But AI is a much bigger jump that they're seeing it as a much bigger jump, and it also helps mature the value add too. I guess is the more you can reach the lay people, it goes back to what we were talking about, that flow from home to work and work to home, right? That's got to keep being tapped and in new and interesting ways.
If you think about the parallel between, so I did a little bit of work in the Middle East, and in this last year, both Saudi and UAE had announced that they were going to sign up to OpenAI GPT Pro, I think it is the top end one, for every member of the population, and they were exploring data centers and all of this stuff. And this goes a little bit to what you're saying about the market for people who haven't adopted yet. That's where you're going to get more users in markets like that, where they've made a conscious national level decision to say we want everybody to be AI literate or be able to use some of these tools. Therefore, even if they weren't using them by themselves, we're going to make sure that they have access to it so they can do it, and that hopefully will elevate the level of the country. That's not an approach we see in the West. So in the UK, they're not doing that, and in the US, they're not doing that. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, and it'll be interesting to see. It's both not surprising and surprising that it's coming from that part of the world, because like, it's not surprising because the general conversation is, everyone's working on trying to diversify their economy. Isn't like petrostates and stuff are going like, we can't be a petrostate forever. I mean, the Saudis have been going around putting money into everything because they know we've got a lot of money right now because oil has been king. Oil is not going to be king forever. We know this, and we need to be other things. And what's interesting to me there is how those are societies we often consider for their, when we think about them in tech, we think about tight information control. We think about censorship and those kind of things. And AI makes that incredibly hard, and especially even DeepSeek coming out of China. Growing up in the US in the 90s, all we heard about was the Great Firewall of China. Like, we did a whole unit on it when we covered censorship in our social studies class, right? And how much of that is propaganda versus how much of that is reality, I don't have a real ability to evaluate that going back. But when I see, even our own AI hallucinations and stuff, or even just the interesting ways that AI can create security issues, to see leadership coming there, that just says we have to catch up more in the West. That we're not, if these folks are willing to take that kind of gamble and make that kind of choice, we also need to catch up, because we have lots of literacy problems here in the West when it comes to tech, lots of different tech. And if we don't actively work to address those, we're going to find ourselves outpaced. There's a huge value in choosing to solve a problem, seeing a problem, going, I see it, it's there, and I will say that it exists. And now I'm going to choose that we are going to make an attempt to solve that problem. We have been very ungood at that in tech in the West, whether it's privacy, whether it's security. I've been talking to a lot of customers lately about cyber insurance and a lot of cyber insurance brokers. And one of the biggest problems we have with cybersecurity right now is there's no cybersecurity driving record, right? Like, but when I have to go get auto insurance, it's a very mature insurance model, right? If I have been a good driver and behaved, I pay a lot less. And if I drive a boring car instead of a sports car, I pay a lot less. We don't have that for cybersecurity, and we absolutely don't have that for AI. And like, if we don't start really treating this as a thing we have to actively manage as a society, the societies that choose to actively manage this, that choose to embrace this and charge at these problems and face them and solve them in some way, will beat us. in whatever we want to compete on.
I mean, the literacy imperative is one thing, because I think East and West and developing versus developed, inverted commas, countries
Giant air quotes.
have very different views on literacy generally, not just AI literacy, but basic education, mathematics, and things like that. But the other side of it is, and this is probably not something that you see, but it's something that I see because just because of our geographies. I'm in the UK, which is broadly ignoring politics. It's kind of in Europe, and you're in the US. Now, from the UK business perspective, a lot of companies will say, we don't want to use Chinese models because the Chinese government will have access to your data.
Yeah, we get that here
Now,
too.
right. Now, I think it's justified for you guys because you can legitimately say, I'm in the US and it's okay for the US government to have access to my data. Whereas in the UK, making the same argument is mental gymnastics because you're saying one government over here will have access to my data or another government over there is going to have access to our data. And it kind of doesn't make any difference because either way, you're saying there's a different country's government going to have access to our business data. Whereas I think for you guys to make a choice between US and China is kind of obvious because you're in the US.
Yeah, and that is that is a rabbit hole I would love to dive down, but I think we would I could rant for a while on that specifically, but I think I'll spare the audience.
One for another day.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that bombshell, right? So we've
Yeah.
done the future piece, and we won't necessarily rant against all of the different governments that we may or may not have issues with, because let's face it, we still want to travel, right?
Right, exactly.
So short term, long term, we've talked about what's the coming year. So for the listeners, for the people who are interested in the kinds of things that you might be doing, the coming year, how can people get in touch with you for some of the exciting things you're going to do over the next 6 months or 12 months? And what are some of those things?
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is by email, dwalter@vespasian.tech. I'm sure there will be show notes or something that can go into. And as far as what we'll be doing, we're going to be doing a lot of what we've already been doing. We're looking for small and medium businesses that want to collaborate on improving their security posture and their governance model. For AI, that's, when we talk about AI readiness, it's helping you decide as a business what your AI stance and methods are going to be. We're a great place to reach out to for this is our first go. We want to do our first go at maturing our IT and information security. We want to do our first go at how do we adopt AI safely? And that's going to be my big focus in those areas. It has been for most of my career. And my biggest responsibility I have to my customers, current and future, is to just do things like this to keep up to date, engage with people like you, Ash, and learn other perspectives and other ways to do things so I can keep what I'm doing for my clients relevant. What I've learned is I'm born to be a consultant. I'm born to do this and just help people that are less capable than me benefit from my experience and cross these scary chasms with some support. And I'm going to keep doing that. I want to meet you where you're at and help you get through what technology life is right now and what it's going to be by the end of the year and what it's going to be next year and the following. And that's probably my, I don't think I'm going to do anything individually super huge. It's just going out and finding these people and keep doing what I've always been doing, just keeping it modern, keeping it sharp, keeping it effective.
Absolutely. So without further ado, Dylan, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation today. I am going to say, if you're out there, you want to know more about Dylan, you want to know what he's doing, or you want to contact him, the details will be in the captions, descriptions, whatever it is, depending on whatever platform you're viewing this on. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. You're on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. If you're seeing this on Instagram or LinkedIn, you'll be able to instantly connect to Dylan's profile as he will be tagged anyway. So thank you so much for being here with me, Dylan.
Thanks for having me.
And the folks out there, thank you for listening and see you on the next episode.